Hello and welcome back to the third video in the FPS tutorial series. When we left off last time, we had given the player the ability to fire the weapon, as well as a little bit of screen shake and kind of fake recoil to the player. And what we're going to be doing today is some housekeeping, making sure that the project is scalable so that we can turn this into something like a roguelike or an arena shooter, and adding proper recoil to the players. So this is what we have that we'll be working on today. All right, let's get into it. So to add this recoil that we've added to the screen, what I'm utilizing is a timeline. That's what this node is right here. This timeline allows you to create graphs and curves and get the outputs of these values. So what I've done is I've added two float curves, two float tracks, and if you go back to the event graph, you'll see that it adds them here on the outputs of the node. So what we want to do is, for starters, we want to reduce the length to 0.2, and then we want to left click the add float track, and you will get a graph comes up right here. You can rename it, which I've renamed mine to kick. And what we want to do is we want to create the animation of the gun here in its values. So what I've done, you can go ahead and copy this and we'll move from there, is at 0 times 0, I've added a value for 52. At time 0.05, I've added a value for 40. And then at 0.2, I've added the value for 52. So this is the position that the gun is moving. It starts on the value here, goes backwards, and then it goes forwards back to its original position. And you can see that I have actually input this value into a relative location node for the weapon mesh. And this is how we are actually animating the weapon. And I've split it up into two parts. So one controls the back and forth kick of the gun, and the other one controls the recoil, which will be the roll and the pitch of the gun as well. So I'm going to leave this up on screen. Let's go back to both. I'll leave this up on screen. You can see that up at the top, it's 52, 40 to 52. And then for recoil, let me zoom these to fit. It is 0, 0.05, and 0.99. Then it goes down to 0.08 on time and value negative 1.38. And then it resets its position. To add a new curve or a new point on the graph, you right click and you add key. And then if you click on that key, you can actually type in manually the values for the time and the value on the graph. Let's go ahead and move over here. This red node, for those of you that don't know if there's any beginners, is a custom event node. To create those, you right click and type custom event. You want to add custom event. You can rename it. I've made one called play recoil. And then I've created a float variable here called random gun roll. And I'll show you what we utilize this for in just a second. But first, we want to input a random float range, which we went over last time whenever we were talking about the weapon spread in the last video. And I've used the values negative 1.5 and 1.5. And over here on the outputs of the timeline, on update, what update does is every frame this timeline is playing, it's going to update those values inside of it. So that's how we're getting the real-time update for all of the animations. What we want to do is we want to get our weapon skeletal mesh component, drag it into the scene or into the graph. And then off that, we want to get the relative location. So drag off and type relative, if I could spell it, relative location. So get relative location here. This is what you're going to want. And then once you do get that, what you want to do is you want to split the pen. So get relative location, right click, and split structure pen. That's how you get these green nodes here. It splits because the location requires an X, Y, and Z. And so now we can individually utilize each of these values. And same here, you want to set relative location. So drag off weapon, set relative location, and you can split this structure pin here. Split structure pin, and that's how we've gotten this node right here. We want to do the same for the rotation so that we can rotate and roll the gun as well as moving its position. So I'll let you guys go ahead and fill this in here. And now that you've done so, what we need to do is we need to now play this custom event or activate this node. So what I've done is if I go back into our weapon fire macro that we made, you can see that in between fire and delay, I have now played the recoil. So this is just a reference to the custom event we made. If I open that, what you can do now that we have a custom event, you can right click and type play recoil, which is the name of the event that we made. So play recoil, and it'll show up as a blue node, meaning this is an event or a function call. It is calling that function. You'll see here that this is something I've added. Whenever I mentioned housekeeping earlier, we will go over that very soon. But for now, your recoil is now in. And if we go back to the test map, hit play, you should see that your weapon now has the actual recoil animation added to it. Pretty sweet. All right, I will move on to the housekeeping stuff now to kind of show you what I did. I input a few variables here and there just to make our lives easier. And the way I've done that is instead of housing all of the variables per weapon inside of the player, what we want to do is we want to make it scalable for future use. So let's say we wanted to make a looter shooter, or we wanted to make any sort of project that has a bunch of variants of weapons or the ability to equip different weapons that have different values and variables in them. What we want to do is we want to make it as easy as possible to scale and make all of those weapons. So what I've done is I've created a data asset. And these data assets are basically tables inside of a blueprint that hold all of the values that you want to adjust. So how we do that is we right click, we want to go to blueprint class, and here under all classes you want to type in primary data asset. So with that typed in, you want to select primary data asset and rename it to, I've named it BP underscore weapon master. And I'll open that, and you'll be presented with a completely empty blueprint. And on the left, you'll see functions, macros, and variables. I've gone through and I've added all of my variables that I want to use for now. This will grow over time. The more that we want to add to gameplay, the more weapons, the more variations we want, we will continue to grow this list of variables. So I will go through now and show you, actually you can see here all of the values for these. I will go through them just because there's a couple I want to explain how to actually get as variables. So we have our first boolean to check if the weapon is automatic or not. When we have revolvers or sniper rifles or semi-automatic weapons, we might not want it to, be able to shoot in automatic. We've also got our magazine capacity as an integer. Then time between shots. We used that in the previous video inside of the player. And what we want to do is we actually want to pull that out of the player because we want each individual weapon to have its own fire rate, its own time between shots. Then the weapon spread that we also used in the last video has been pulled out of the player and it's been put inside of this weapon blueprint. Then we have the weapon mesh. It's just a skeletal mesh variable. and then a weapon fire sound. So I added in the link of the description a download link to all of the sound files that I used in my previous project, and that's what we will be using here. So you want to make sure that your variable type is sound cue. That's very, very important. Then we've got the camera shake. So how you access that is in the variable type, instead of typing matinee, here, I'll do it, matinee camera shake. So in the last video, we made a camera shake blueprint. What we want to do is we want to reference that. However, instead of an object reference, we want to get a class reference. So make sure that your variable type is a class reference to the matinee camera shake. And that's how we get access to all of these camera shakes. And then the last one is just the camera shake scale. So there are weapons, maybe you have a variation of a weapon that has, it shoots explosive ammo. So you want to make sure each time you fire the weapon that the camera shakes really heavily, but you don't want to make a completely new camera shake blueprint. We can use this scale to actually scale up our already pre-existing camera shake intensity. I will mention the sound here. So what I've done is I've actually imported all of the sounds that you can find in the download link, and I have created a sounds folder, and I've just dragged them all in. So what we want to do is we want to go to the gun sounds, and you'll see that I've created 2 sound cues here. How you create a sound cue, if you don't know, is you can right-click a sound and hit create cue. And whenever you create that cue, it will open up into a screen like this. It'll look like this. And what we want to do is we want to add all the variations of the sound, and we want to make it play random versions each time we fire. So how we do that is you can click on your wave player, copy and paste it, and then with this new wave player selected, you can change what sound is being played in this wave player. So I've included variations for the SMG and the rifle, and we want to use this random node. So if we right click and type in random, we get this random sound node, and we can add inputs with this plus icon. So we could have 10 variations, 20 variations if we wanted, but we're going to stick with 3. So we're going to plug in all of our outputs into the random, and the output of the random goes into the total audio output node here. And you can actually hear the variation. If I hit play cue, you see that it randomly chooses one of these 3 options and will play that into the output. So very, very useful for making your sounds a little bit different. You can also add another node that adjusts the volume and the pitch of the sounds before going into the output, but I've already included the variations here, so we don't need to do that. So go ahead and save this. Now, in the weapon, now that we've created that sound cue, in the variable type, make sure you type sound cue, and you can just get an object reference and set your default weapon fire sound here. Again, these are all of the default variables that we'll be using. So now we want to create this actual data asset. We created the primary data asset, but now we need to create each of the children of it. So what we'll do is in weapons, we want to go to blueprints, weapons. We can right click and we want to go to miscellaneous. We want to go to data asset. And under data asset, you can type in BP_weapon master, or the name of your primary data asset that you made. And we want to left click it. And you'll see it has created a new one. So we'll do BP_SMG test. And if we open this, you'll see that it now has all of these options available that we made in our primary data asset. And I can adjust these as I see fit. So if I want to do a bunch of spread. So let's do 10 spread, but we want to have a really, really high fire rate. So we'll do 0.02. And we just want the camera shake scale to be crazy. So 10. And then let's go and save that. And how we get this to work with the player, we'll go through that next, but I want to show you that this data asset system works on its own. So if I go back to my player and I equip, under equipped weapon, I input the SMG test that I just made, you'll see my screen's going to go crazy. So obviously I went crazy with the values, but just by plugging that in, if I go back to SMG1 and save, you'll see that just like that, I've given the player a completely new weapon to use. And it can house all its own stats. If I had another skeletal mesh, I could change the weapon mesh here, and that would update the player's weapon mesh. The sounds, if I wanted to do the rifle fire instead of the SMG. Save this. So, and I've changed the sound now just like that. So it's a very, very scalable system that I definitely recommend you utilize moving forward in your own projects. So I'll go through all of the areas that I had to change this now. So mainly, if I go into the weapon fire, you'll see that I have an equipped weapon variable. So what we want to do is in the variables tab, we want to create a new variable, and we want to go to the variable type, and we want to type in the name of your primary data asset that you made. So in my case, it's the BP underscore weapon master, the BP underscore weapon master, and you should see it come up in the object type. We want to create an object reference, and you want to set the value to be one of the data assets that you made, one of the children actors. I'll go ahead and close these. So BP underscore SMG1, and I want to drag that value, get equipped weapon, into the graph, and I can now access all of the values and variables that are on that data asset. So I've gotten the time between shots, and I've plugged it into the delay. So this is how I'm now going to control my fire rate per weapon. The other one we've done is if we go into the fire graph, the fire function that we made, you'll see at the end under the camera shake, I've changed it to be client start camera shake, and you get your equipped weapon, so you drag it off, and then you want to get those values. So camera, you can get camera shake or your camera shake scale. So get camera shake scale, and you want to plug these values into your client start camera shake, and that is what will now allow us to play any of our camera shakes whenever we fire our weapon. For the sound, what I've done is I've created another function here. So if we open this, I want to, again, make it scalable. So anytime I need my weapon to play a sound or a sound to happen when I do an action with my weapon, I don't want to make 10 different functions for, to handle everything. I want to condense everything into one function so that I don't have to make redundant code. So what I've done is in this function, I've typed in switch on, you can do like integer value. What the switch does is based on the input you give it, it will give you a different output. To get this specific node, weapon sound select enum, what we have to do is we actually have to make an enumerator. So you'll see here, I've made a new folder, data tables, weapon sound select enum, and to do that, you right click, go to blueprints, and enumeration, and you will get a blank enumerator here. To add slots to it, you hit the new button, and it will start populating more slots. You can type in whatever you want here. It can be the craziest names, but what we want to do here is we want to type in all of the events or times that we think we're going to need to play a sound. We can grow this list later, and it will automatically update this switch here. So if I added a new one and just set new enumerator 5, you'll see that it is now adds this slot, new enumerator 5. So we don't have to worry about when and how can I add new values. You can do it at any time. So I've added these 5 values here, and I want to type switch on, and then I type the name of the enumerator I made. So in this case, it's weapon sound select enum. And I can drag off, and I want to play sound 2D. So right click, play sound 2D. And then what I've done is I've gotten the equipped weapon again. You pull it off here, get equipped weapon, and then I want to get the sound value that I made, the weapon fire sound variable that I made. I want to get that. So weapon fire sound. You see I've already actually gotten it here, and I've just plugged that value into my sounds. The fire weapon. Now, how we call that is in the fire function, I can type the name of the new function I made, which was play weapon sound. And the input gives me a selection option. So we can actually use this function throughout the entire blueprint. And if I wanted to, on reload, I play a sound. On empty magazine, on, fire a secondary weapon. Let's say you had a grenade launcher attached to the bottom of your weapon. You can add parts to your enumerator or add options to your enumerator, and it will populate here. And so anytime we want to play a sound, we can now utilize this function here. So yeah, fantastic stuff. Go back to the event graph, make sure we didn't miss anything. We did our fire rate, our random gun roll, our sounds, recoil. I do believe that covers all of the housekeeping. And we will move on to the magazine capacity and widget reloading.